I'm Nate Lind, and I help people interested in buying or selling online businesses get the transaction done without the deal falling apart. If you're looking to buy or sell online businesses, then be sure to keep tuning in for more videos like this one. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications about new videos and interviews. And introduce yourself in the comments. Are you a buyer or a seller? Enjoy the interview.
One of the places that I see one of the struggles for entrepreneurs, and it comes in different levels. I call them critical shifts in the business, right? Business will grow, and if a business goes from $1 million to $10 million, they rarely go in a straight, line up from 1 million to 10, right? They go through ups and down cycles along the way. And almost always you can see what I call critical shift. There are places where they hit a wall, right? And as a result, they had to make some significant change in the business. And you can normally see that they were either successfully navigating that critical shift or they were unsuccessful, in which case the trend goes either more significantly up or it goes more significantly down. And so those critical shift places are things that occur. They test the management skills of the person that owns the business, right? And so management skills aren't something that everybody has automatically. And some people have greater capacity to manage than others. And so, but one of the things that I think, with small businesses where you can run and make all the decisions and do all the work if necessary, from that point of view, sometimes it's very difficult to develop a management, style or a management culture. One of the places that I always try to look at is if we've got employees in particular or strategic partners or relationships that are, core to the business, is it's always important. One of the testings that we look at is what does the manager or the owner, who sometimes are one and the same, obviously, what's their view of what their employees or their strategic partners, what their role is, what their responsibilities are, what the business objectives are. We want that person to tell us what that other person's responsibilities are, what their goals are, how they view the business. We want to understand how they view it. And then we want to ask that same question to that particular person, or people, because the connection, how close they are to each other, goes a long way in determining what the culture of the business is. If there's a real strong alignment, right, between what I think your job should be and what you should be doing and what your success looks like, if what I say is what you say, our culture is pretty closely aligned normally. Doesn't mean it's a good culture. It just means it's closely aligned. Doesn't mean it's a healthy culture. It just means it's closely aligned. But it's a good place to start, right? Is that, are we aligned? If there's multiple people or multiple partners or whatever the case might be, do we view it the same way? And because if you do, you tend to act in sync better. So the culture is more closely aligned. And that means if you've got bad habits, the organization has bad habits. And if you have good habits, the organization has good habits, typically, if they're closely aligned. And so that's a way, that you can address it sometimes, but know that you have to address it as a group. You can't just fix one, sometimes because it's culturally ingrained to do it a different way. So the management and culture is one of the things that we look at. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. Again, that's another piece in the lower middle market, I think, that, a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with. Frequently they're owner-operated businesses, and their culture is that between whatever communication they have and with their virtual assistants or with their contractors. And then, kind of in that, that next phase of business, I'm starting to see more infrastructure, more, in the sense of human capital. And then from that also, grows more management and culture.
And depending upon this level of business, the size of the business and so forth, it ties back over sometimes into that vision and strategy, business planning, right? Because if you're going to grow the business and you've got people built into it, the assumption is the people have got to grow as well. Not only the owner has got to grow, but the individuals associated with business. So to the degree that there's an expectation that we're going to be here with this level of capacity and skill sets today, a year from now, we need to be better. I always tell, people in this scenario, if they're buying an Amazon business, somebody's going to become an Amazon expert, right? You can't be third party in all of your expertise forever. Or if you do, you need to understand that that's what you're doing. Same thing, in the world of Facebook or the world of social media. If you're not a social media expert and it's an important element to your business, then somebody's got to be an expert, and if you don't have an expert, you've either got to source one, or you've got to develop one, or you've got to become one. So though that's the growth element of really the analysis of people and how do you help the people get to a better place that grows the business. So that's another part of that culture part. It's also in that healthy core business test, which is the next part of that. I'm looking for that. I'm trying to evaluate the culture of the business. Is it a healthy culture? And by that, I mean, is it a positive culture? Is it reinforcing positive attributes, best practices? People are aligned with best practices of the business. They're in an environment where they feel like they can be heard, that their views are able to be expressed, but ultimately people don't let the objective of the business to be expressing views all the time. We've got a business to run, and so there's got to be a healthy relationship between the goals of the business, financial performance of the business, and those personal attributes that help people to be aligned with the business and to be a part of to take ownership of the business. The other part of the healthy core business test, which is more analytical, is, for me, and this is where the SBA piece sometimes comes into play and where it comes from to a large degree. And that is that it's difficult sometimes for a business can be extremely financially successful for 1 year, right? It may even be not so successful in year one, but really successful in year two. Generally speaking, one of the biases that we start with is that it typically may take a business 3 years to really be able to evaluate, how healthy that business is. Doesn't mean that a business can't be valuable beyond that. It just means that if a business has had 3 years, it's normally at a year of startup type of a scenario. Secondly, it has another year of follow-up where you can start to evaluate the year one startup area, which is extraordinary. It's not the same. You never have another startup year. The second year is the first what I would consider more ordinary year. And then the third year starts coming as what is one ordinary year, start looking at another ordinary year, right? We start having more valid comparisons year over year, month over month, things like that. So when we've got healthy performance in that level, that's a real value add as far as saying this is a very healthy, it meets that healthy business test. Doesn't mean it's not healthy if it doesn't do that. It just means it's one of those things that help to add the expectation that this business has health attributes that are important and valuable. Make sense?
Yep, absolutely.
Yep.
Shall we step over to the relationships and dependencies?
Sure. That to me is one of the real weaknesses, frequently one of the real vulnerabilities. It ties back to the 13th one, which is where vulnerabilities to value growth, things of that nature as well. But, one of the things that is really important to evaluate with the company is where dependencies exist. And those dependencies can exist in the supply side, right? They can in the service side, they can be in the support side, strategic partners, marketing partners, sales partners, operating partners, or employees or relationships. All of these relationships in a business, both internal and external, need to be evaluated in terms of how dependent the business is upon them and how vulnerable they are to them going away. And so that test of if any of these relationships go away, what is the game plan or what needs to be done or what does it do to the business needs to be assessed. It's sort of like a stress test kind of an idea. You're coming back and saying, here's all the relationships in place and the dependencies. And Amazon is one of those, right? If you're an Amazon seller, Amazon is a dependency. It's a big dependency. And if Amazon says you can't do business on Amazon anymore, it's very deadly to a lot of businesses who are wholly dependent upon Amazon, for their business role. So your strategy around that, or your stress test, or your how do you deal with that, for example, and just kind of stay with Amazon for a second. One of the things that every business owner should transfer, or every new buyer should expect to receive, is what is the process built in for handling any kind of Amazon problem. If we get a warning from Amazon, what's our process? How do we go about it? Templates and things of that nature. It says, here's what we do. If we get a warning, or we get a bad review, or we get any kind of a thing that threatens, that dependency relationship, we need to have a process to address it that's been tried and proven. So the degree that we've gone through those things, we have processes for it. It helps to mitigate some of the dependencies around, say, an Amazon relationship. Same thing with any other kind of critical relationship. What happens if my primary vendor goes away? What options and alternatives do I have? And buying a new business, supply side is critical until you've got new relationships that you can find alternatives to. So building in a mitigating plan for that to make sure you've got time to get in and find alternatives is an important part of the dependency test. So
absolutely. Supply chain, if you're selling off Amazon on your own website, your merchant credit card processing, so the ability to receive credit card payments,
yep.
Big ones that I see, huge dependencies, huge relationships. If I'm a buyer, I want to know what those look like. If I'm a seller, I want to have some redundancies in place to showcase to the buyer that those dependencies are not a single point of failure.
Yeah, and I would say one of the other places is that this is another area which hard. It's a management skill that needs to be developed with a business owner, right? And is how do you supervise people that know more about a particular topic than you do, right? So they are a dependency, and they can be sometimes a very dangerous dependency, because if they know more about a particular part of your business than you do, how do you supervise that? How do you hold them accountable? How do you hold that performance level there? How do you know when it becomes a vulnerability you can't live with? So part of the relationship and dependency evaluation is that how do you maintain that relationship? How do you make it an accountable relationship, even when you aren't going to become as expert in the particular process as they are? And it's a communication thing, right? What is the expectation from it? And it's sometimes, I know in terms of advertising and marketing, it's saying, gee, we're generating all these revenues, but I don't know I don't know if it's good, bad, or indifferent. I don't know if we're investing too much or too little. I don't know if we're effectively spending the money, or how do I know? The guru tells me so, from that point of view. It's got to be a kind of thing where you don't necessarily want to become the guru necessarily, but you do want to understand how to manage and supervise those relationships. So that's a critical, and the better that exists, the more valuable the business that has that in place is as a result. So
that's great. Let's hit technology. Tell us all about that.
Technology we could spend a week on, right? Or weeks or months or years. And I think it really is a scale of how, and we look at it as being either an existing dependency or a potential likely dependency. I think, that technology is more, it's so broad-based and there's so many elements of it that you could, again, go down to it. But it really is about what role does technology play in the business? What role should it play in the business? Where are the new technology opportunities perhaps, or are we cutting edge? And is our business concept cutting edge dependent? One of the concerns I have in the vulnerability sometimes is a small business that has heavy technology advantages, right? They've got a technological edge in the marketplace, but they're a small business, right? And so if they have a technology edge and they have a large market, they're either going to scale very rapidly and become the next Zoom, right? Or they're going to attract bigger, more well-resourced companies who are going to either copy the technology or move around the technology and so forth. So the technology dependency, from the business vulnerability point of view, needs to be understood. There's not a simple solution to say this is what you do about it in every case. But the role of technology, whether it's a supportive role, the operating the business, the technological elements that give you a marketing edge or give you a delivery edge, a service edge, whatever those are, you need to be able to understand them so you can monitor them in terms of whether or not the technology is remaining on the forefront or if you're starting to be left behind. So it's more about an awareness of the technology than it is of making, say, this is great technology or bad technology. For us anyway, because I don't consider us to be technology experts, but we do want to understand how the role that technology plays.
Yeah, absolutely. Some things that come up for me with regards to technology is if it's been built in house. How has it been built? I've got two companies for sale right now that's not their primary revenue stream, but the technology has enabled the revenue. But the technology is the sexy piece for the buyer. The revenue stream is it just happens to be nice, but it's kind of B2B service revenue. The technology is something looked at from these other companies as a bolt-on because they use that technology or something similar or competitive technology as well, and they'd like to bring something like that in-house.
Yeah. And I think that goes to understanding what business you're in too, right? I mean, if you're in the sales business and you're selling technology, then you don't necessarily have to be the manufacturer of it or the developer of it. You may be, develop those relationships because your strength is in the sales and marketing piece and your relationships that you have in that pathway. If you're in the business of developing new technologies, typically that's a pretty high capital intensive thing where you're in research and development and trial and error and no revenue production in terms of that part of the process. So if you live there, it's a place where you can get trapped into capital requirements beyond the scope of many small businesses. So understanding what role technology plays and what role it plays in your future, how you either move to a more less vulnerable place, or a stronger place is part of what needs to be at least on your radar, and so making that part of the radar.
I love how these two clients used the revenue that was being created based out of a business system they had already developed. They developed the technology to help facilitate and grow and create efficiencies around that business process they had, using a customer focused, they're generating revenue from customers. So they weren't out of pocket. They weren't just like, doing, huge raises and having to pour tons of money into development costs. They had a profitable, profit first, focus and mentality. And they initially approached the brokerage just trying to sell the service-based revenue, not necessarily focusing on the technology. Once I saw the technology, I re-angled the sales opportunity to a technology focused with a recurring revenue stream with it from their business services, and that was it was a really big shift in that entrepreneur's thinking as to how they were approaching the market to sell, but ultimately turned into paying great dividends for them, which is very similar to my own exit strategy in 2016 when I sold a reporting system to a shopping cart. I needed the reporting system because no shopping cart had a reporting system for subscription-based e-commerce, subscription boxes. So I built one, extracting all that data out of the shopping cart I was using, giving me management reporting, and then sure enough, that CRM or that shopping cart ended up buying it from me because it was a profitable system. And at that point, I had gone ahead and rolled it out to a couple of dozen other other e-commerce entrepreneurs. And it's an interesting way that technology can be taken kind of down a different path than maybe you're thinking if you're on the sell side, but on the buy side, looking out for opportunities that can reduce your expenses because you may be using an off-the-shelf piece of technology that may have already been built by another aspiring entrepreneur or another startup. That an acquisition of that could also reduce your costs and give you a competitive advantage.
Yeah, and I think to your point there, Nate, I think that the main thing to come out of these kind of analyticals is to really build whatever your story needs to be around that element, right? What is your technology piece? How does it fit into it? How does it fit into your world currently, and how does it fit into your world going forward? Do you have the expertise that you need in order to be able to utilize it the way that it is, or what is your role relative to the technology that plays a role in your business? So it's as much about defining what the technology is, should be, could be, as much as anything, and do you have the resources to implement it? And if not, what do you do about it, right? What's your role? Scalability, I'll jump there quickly from that point of view. To me, one of the questions that I always ask an entrepreneur is, okay, is tell me 25x for a second, right? How do you get to 25x? How do you get to 25 times where you are right now? And money's not a problem, capital's not a problem for a second. How do you get there, right? What's your, and what would you do to get there? And it really is a what if exercise from that point of view. But as a general rule, right, what it should also do is that you look at how you're going to get to 25x. You should be stress testing along the way, or at least evaluating the stress test elements doing it. What's that? Do we have a plan for that, right? Do we have the capital structure to do that? If not, what does that look like from that point of view? Because the fact that we have a great idea that could potentially get to 25x, if we can't fund it, if we can't support it, if we can't manage it, all of those stressors that we talked about early on come into play. So the scalability analysis is not really about can you get to 20, is it potentially able to get to 25x, but how would you do it, and what are your constraints, to get to 25x. So that exercise is really an important one, I think, for people to start looking at, because it's part of the evolutionary plan, right? If I'm going to get to 25x, the next question is, am I going to do it, next year? Am I going to do it 10 years from now? Or what's my timeline, right? Because it forces me to look at all those other scenarios and have to come into play relative to that. And it's again, a stressor in itself is I hadn't even considered what it would take, because sometimes people grow multiple of their current circumstances and they're there with they didn't plan to get there. They're there. They got there in spite of themselves sometimes.
So can I interject for a second?
Sure.
So the buyer on this side, usually what I see that the questions that they're asking is they want to understand the scalability for a number of reasons. Number one is where's this puppy going to go after they buy it, and then on the sales side, something to think about, like the psychology of what you're dealing with is you're not selling something and like running while it burns to the ground. Like it has to have long-term viability to it. So thinking through these what ifs that Marvin was just talking about, and helping understand a little bit about what's the roadmap again here too. We keep coming back to, we touched it a couple of times, from vision to the relationships and dependencies, the business plan, like those sorts of things are still kind of hitting on the same concept around like where's the buyer going to go with this, and what's going to be the value to them post close.
And I would say the other thing that I want them to consider along the way, right? And that is that where's your exit, right? Because a lot of the venture capitalists, right, they'll come in and they'll say, I want to buy this company, but I'm exiting at 5x, right? So I want to get to 5x at a certain time frame. I want to get in, I want to grow it to 5x, and then we want to get out. We don't want to necessarily hold it forever. Or others may come in and say, we want to take it, we're going to hold it forever. It's going to fold into our scheme of things at the beginning. So along the way with an entrepreneur, it is that he may recognize that I don't want to run this thing at 5x, right? If I get to 5x, I'm out of here. That's my exit place, or 3x, whatever the case might be. So along the way, the investment spending that may require to get to 25x over 5 years may not take place, because you're going to get to 3x and you're going to exit, or 2x and exit, whatever the case might be in that regard. So that's why you go through that process. It helps the planning, the evolutionary planning thought processes there along the way. So it's something that should be considered. Finally, the value growth idea really is that the business is in perpetuity, right? You're saying, hey, I'm building this business in perpetuity. I don't have a plan to exit from it necessarily, and I want to build it. But I'm not going to be around in perpetuity. I may be for my kids, it may be for my grandkids, it may be for my wife, it may be for family wealth, whatever the reason may be. But along the way, then it's saying, hey, one of the vulnerabilities may be me, right? I may be part of the vulnerability because I don't want to be here, for 5 years. I may only want to be here for 2 years or 3 years. So if we're saying the value to growing the business, that brings up the question is how do you create the management team, right? Or the replacements along the way. That's one of the key vulnerabilities that you're really trying to trigger down on here is where is your exit? What may not be selling the business, but when are you bailing, right? When are you leaving this place, or when do you no longer have interest in being here? And so that's one of the vulnerabilities that we try to surface. And this part of this process is to looking at that. Let's plan on keeping the business forever and along the way, which may mean that we may need to do some sorts of investment. May mean that we may invest in certain kinds of relationships, and separating investment type spending from operating type spending, and recognizing that, that there's an investment expectation, whereas I may make, $500,000 next year, but I may want to take $100,000 of that or $200,000 of that, and I may want to invest it. So I'm going to take that and put it into and my expectation of that $200,000 is for me to make $650,000, $700,000 the following year and consistently at a higher level. So CapEx spending comes into play there. We're going to have to invest in the business periodically. When and where does that take place? If we don't do the CapEx spending, what happens to the people that go away? I've got key people who may be leaving, or I got key people who need to leave, right? And am I protected against them going out and opening a competitor along the way? Do I have the kinds of things in place to guard against those kinds of vulnerabilities? So it's a what if exercise as well, but it's something that forces the idea of what are some of these vulnerabilities that are more longer term in terms of rather than what's our vulnerabilities immediately.
That's awesome. Marvin, anything anecdotal you want to add about your 13-point checklist, the baker's dozen?
No, other than, like I said, I think there is no cookie cutter. There's no, I say to people all the time when I do valuations of businesses that I can show you two businesses with identical histories that have significantly different futures and significantly different values. And so all of these elements are the kinds of things that aren't necessarily showing up always on a balance sheet. There are qualitative elements to all of these things that we're looking at, and they are unique to the business there. Every business has a unique quality about it. And so what we're trying to do is to really try to uncover those unique elements that don't show up in those places sometimes, and making sure that we can analyze them and have some qualitative review of them. So
that's awesome.
That's where I live, Nate, most of the time.
Well, for those of you that are watching, if you've made it to this point, you're obviously very interested in mergers and acquisitions.
Or you got nothing better to do.
Or you've got nothing but if you're on the sell side and you've got questions about any of this, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to help you with this. On the buy side, there's a lot of opportunity to have a fantastic person in your corner like Marvin, doing the due diligence alongside of you. He brings a great approach, getting the deal done as opposed to just ripping it to shreds and moving on. Can't tell you how frustrating it is to see the process get stalled or stopped because of a lack of experience or knowledge, or a process with the due diligence expert that is not deal focused. They're extremely risk focused and are just looking to blow apart the deals as opposed to approach it with a can-do attitude. And if you want to get a deal done, if you want to put some recurring revenue or some passive income or some seller discretionary earning into your portfolio in the next year or so, I would absolutely have you reach out to Marvin.
Yeah, and I would just add one point to that trigger, Nate, and that is that one of the key promises or commitments I make in the process with the buyer generally is that my fees, depending on the size of the business, come into play. But if I can't add value to the business, in other words, my objective is to add a high multiple of value to the business as part of the process by uncovering and helping these things, the business, to become more valuable when they take it over. So that's part of the objective there, is we want to make this a more valuable enterprise as part of the process. So.
I love that. Yes, other folks that are out there, they're just doing the due diligence evaluation. They charge a fee. They spit out a report, says it's a terrible business. It's not going to close. It's not worth anything. And then I go right over and we sell it to somebody else who has a fantastic experience with it. So absolutely. Thank you very much so much for your time, Marvin.
Okay, nice talking to you.
Have a good one. And for those of you watching, stay tuned. We got more great stuff coming up, and we appreciate you. Take care. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe and tell me what you thought about it in the comments. Your comments encourage me to continue posting videos, and they give me ideas about what to post next. I read and reply to every single one. Also, if you own an online business and you're curious of how much it's worth, click the link below to get a free business valuation with a member of our team. Who knows? It may even be me you're talking to.